इसमें वो है क्या? कहाँ से आ
तुमने कर दिया था क्या?
नहीं, अच्छा मैंने मेल पे दिया था ना,
दिया ही आने देना।
कैसे देखेंगे यार?
क्योंकि हमको यहाँ रह के ऑनलाइन वालों को
ऐसा कैमरा कर दूंगी क्या?
शुरू है। तूने आवाज बंद कर दी थी क्या उस समय? मैंने मैंने तो कुछ भी नहीं किया इसमें। आवाज चल। अब क्लास में सकते हैं। मैम वो आपने मेरे डॉक्यूमेंट जमा किए थे ना, तो वो डॉक्यूमेंट्स मुझे वापस मैंने कब किए? तुमको वापस दे तो दिए? नहीं दिए, वो बीए में करे थे ना मैंने। तूने बीए में कर दिए थे मेरे? तो मैम हमने पहले बीए लिया था ना, फिर अभी बीकॉम लिया है, तो सब अभी मेरे को क्लास अटेंड करनी है। अब कल करेंगे अपन। हाँ तो वो मैम आ रही है, वो सर ने बना रिसिप्ट दिखा देना। देखिए तो कोई भी चक्कर आ रहे बस तबीयत कल से खराब है मेरी, थोड़ा काम भी नहीं चल रहा और मेरे को चक्कर आ रहा है, अभी तो मेरी तबीयत ठीक नहीं। एक तो ये मीटिंगों का चक्कर इतना है कि बस हर दिन मीटिंग, कल से फिर अब कल भी नहीं मिलेंगे हम, अब तुम बाद में लेना है अपने डॉक्यूमेंट। मैम बाकी सब लोग क्या नाम है? मंडे को मिलेंगे। प्रेरणा तगाड़े। प्रेरणा तगाड़े। अभी तुम बीकॉम का किसका लेके आई थी? नैना नैना वो मैम, और कोई लड़की तुमने थी? अभी तुम्हारी कुछ तुम्हारी ऐसी तो आई। हाँ तभी तो बोले तुम थी। अब आ रही है आवाज? आवाज नहीं, सब बच्चों ने म्यूट पे कर रखा, बच्चे जो भी है बोलो म्यूट पे सबका। आपकी आवाज है, आपकी आवाज आ रही उधर है, यहाँ पर जो बात कर रहा हो सब सुना रहा होगा। तो मैम वो अपना म्यूट कर रखा होगा ताकि उनकी आवाज ना आए। अभी चालू होगा तो मेरे को आवाज आ जाएगी। अभी चालू क्यों नहीं रही? ट्रायल ले रहे हैं, कर क्या रहे हैं? अब ये चालू होगा तो आवाज आएगी मेरे को। मीटिंग ले कौन रहा है? भोपाल के कॉलेज से है, न्यू एजुकेशन कॉलेज। मैम अपना म्यूट बंद करना है कि सब कर रहेंगे? अपना तो बंद करो, बंद करना ना, सुनना आप।
the catchword of his profile. Born in Allahabad, Uttar Pradesh, he earned his master's degree in political science from Allahabad University in 1978, where he was also awarded the Chancellor's Gold Medal Award for being the best all-rounder. Before joining the Indian Administrative Service in 1981, he served the Indian Police Service for a year. He won the Director's Gold Medal for the Best Officer Trainee at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration amongst the officers of his batch. As a civil servant, he held various assignments within both the state, that is Uttar Pradesh, and the central government. During the final years of his career, he served as Secretary to Government of India in the Ministry of Coal, where he handled the aftermath of the coal scam. Thereafter, he served as Secretary, School Education and Literacy, where he attempted to foster public-private partnership to improve quality of school education. As a strategist thinker and an innovative leader, he won several awards and nominations. He was selected as one of the 35 action heroes in India Today's 35 Action Annual Edition. He is the founder chairman of Nexus of Good, an initiative towards recognizing positive action and providing inspiration to the society at large to replicate them. He is also the author of the bestseller, Not Just a Civil Servant. Also, a recently launched book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. Without any ado, I hand over the platform, the online platform, to Mr. Anil Swarup. A warm welcome to you, sir, in the virtual learning platform of the Bhopal School of Social Sciences.
Thank you very much for those very kind words, and very good afternoon to all of you. Happy Education's Day. What could be a better day than this one to talk about education in India? Now, before I start speaking further, I have a request to make to all of you. You know, I'm not a professional speaker, so I find it difficult to speak to a laptop.
Sir, you're not audible. Anil, sir,
Okay.
you're not audible. The other participants online, I would request you to kindly remain muted and, if possible, put off your cameras so that our focus of attention remains the inspiring words of Mr. Anil Swarup, our keynote address for the day.
Am I audible now? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Okay. So, okay, I'll thank you very much for those very kind words. There is a small suggestion to all of you. One, please keep your mics on the off mode. And number two, since I'm not a professional speaker, I find it difficult to speak to a laptop screen. So those of you that can open your videos, please open them so that I know what I'm saying is creating some impact. In physical interface, it's much easier because you can make out whether what you're talking is making any sense to the audience there. On the virtual platform, at least the photographs will, or the video will help me understand whether I'm reaching out to you or not. Because from your facial expression, I can make out whether I'm making some sense. Now, as I talk about the national education policy that was announced in 2020, I'll give you a bit of a background on my experience as a Secretary School Education. That will give the context of the national education policy. Now, before I joined as Secretary School Education, I was posted as Coal Secretary Government of India. This was in 2014, when things were pretty bad for the coal sector. In fact, when I did get posted as Coal Secretary, I called up a friend of mine to inquire about the nature of the sector. And instead of answering my question, he asked me a counter question. He asked me, have you seen gangs of Wasepur? So that was my introduction to the coal sector, which was replete with mafias. Fortunately, in the 2 years that I spent there, we could get rid of most of the mafias, and the coal sector had seen unprecedented improvement with improvement in coal production. Thereafter, I got posted as school education, so I thought I was coming out of the dark dungeons of coal mines to the bright lights of school education. But to my utmost horror, I found that Whereas in the coal sector, all the mining was underground and the mafias were overground. In school education sector, all the mafias were underground, eating into the essentials of Indian society, causing havoc. And in the 20 months that I spent as school education secretary, I tried to identify such mafias, such issues, which I'll share with you. And fortunately, some of the issues probably will get addressed by the National Education Policy. So let me touch upon the areas of concern that I found in the education sector or school education sector, and touch upon how are some of the issues that I found then and I tried to raise are or probably will be addressed by the National Education Policy. You know, it wasn't very long before I discovered that teachers lie at the pivot of school education in India. My view was very clear within 3 months that if we took care of the problems or issues relating to teachers, education will see a phenomenal jump in the country. And I don't think I was wrong. I think some of you are in the field of education will actually endorse this point of view, that I think that's one part that has been neglected so awfully that we have run into very serious problems in school education. Now, I look at the entire value chain of a school education teacher, beginning with how they are trained in B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges. And to my utmost horror, I found that the biggest mafia of school education is in the domain of B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges. I recall that the chairman of the National Council of Teachers Education, a very outstanding officer, Santosh Mathew, he came and informed me, sir, there are around 16,000 B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges, out of which around 4,000 do not exist or exist only on paper. And if you pay them well, you can get a degree. And imagine what sort of an education this teacher will deliver who's not been to any college or not been trained and been selected. So in order to sort it out, and I must confess that I made these efforts to sort out some of the problems of school education, since in the beginning, 2 books were mentioned. Details are outlined in those books, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant and Not Just a Civil Servant. Those of you who want to have the details can go through that. There are a few chapters there. But I'll briefly mention about what I saw in terms of B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges. So what the chairman NCTE decided, that he'll issue a letter to all these colleges to furnish information on an affidavit. Why on an affidavit? Because if they furnish wrong information, they could be taken to task criminally. Because wrong information on affidavit, you can be held criminally liable. Now this set the cat amongst the pigeons. So these are very, very strong and very, very powerful people, the B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges. So what they did was, they first tried to approach politicians. That's the first thing that they do. They approach a few chief ministers. But fortunately, I had been traveling a lot through the country and interacting with the chief ministers to explain to them how important is such education for teachers who become teachers ultimately. And so they did not get support politically. And finally, they approached 17 high courts. 3 of those high courts granted stay. Now, this was a stay against seeking information from them. So Chairman NCTE personally appeared in one of the courts and argued that what was being sought was information. How can you stop seeking of information? The judges got so annoyed with the Chairman NCTE that they issued a contempt notice again. And they issued a notice to me asking me how the Chairman NCTE could be removed. Now, it was at this stage that the government or some of the people in the government that were supporting Chairman withdrew so to their support. No one wanted to take up issue with the high courts. And so Santosh Mathew had to resign. I mean, this was one of the failures of my career. I've had many successes, many failures. This is also outlined in my book. But the good news is that all the effort that Santosh Mathews as chairman NCTE had put in has found language in the National Education Policy. I don't know how many are aware that the National Education Policy now talks about an integrated B.Ed and D.El.Ed course, which means it will be a 4-year course. So all these fraudulent B.Ed colleges will have to close shop because they have to convert into 4-year course, seek fresh certification from the NCTE. And in that, probably in days to come, we will have better teachers in the schools. I traveled a lot during my career as Secretary School Education. In the first 3 months, I visited almost 24 states of the country. And when I say states, it was not merely state headquarters. It was also interior areas like Bastar and Sukma. Once again, I'd request you, if you all can switch on your videos. I'm sure that by the afternoon you would have taken your bath and dressed appropriately to be visible. In the morning, sometimes it becomes difficult on a holiday because you don't know how your hair is and what. But you can rest assured that I'm not going to pass any comment on what you're wearing or how you are. But it is nice to see some, I can see Sakshi smiling, which is wonderful, because then you get this impression that you are engaging in a conversation with somebody. Otherwise, you're speaking to somebody, and Amitabh Bachchan can do that in front of a camera. I find it difficult. I find conversations, and for you also, you would believe that we are sitting in front of each other and having conversation. That's why I request those that can afford to open their cameras, please do that. So that was one of the biggest problem that I faced, and I'm glad that that issue is being addressed in the national education policy. The second one was the manner in which teachers are selected for government schools. Now, I don't know how many of you have an association with the government schools, but I also don't know whether you're aware that one of the former chief ministers, at least till some time ago, was behind the bars for this racket in selection of school teachers. Now, look at this situation. You get a degree by paying the money, and you somehow become a teacher in government school. What sort of education will you provide? One of the primary reasons of poor quality of education in this country is, of course, the absence of teacher, and a large number of teachers that are teaching are unqualified. This problem also is apparently getting sorted out in the national education policy, because they are talking in terms of a different recruitment system of teachers. We will see how it evolves, how the policy evolves, and how these teachers are recruited in future. But the good thing about the national education policy is it touches upon every aspect of school education. I looked at that aspect, and in that sense, I cannot think of a better document of education policy as the one that we have in 2020. Whether all of it will be implemented or not, only time will tell, because I was a part of the government, is very good at announcing policies and making announcements. The real problem is actual implementation. And I'll come to the implementation part at the end of my presentation. So second problem, as I said, was in terms of selection of teachers. Now we come to the next one. When a person becomes a teacher, how do I train that teacher during in-service? We have a lot of training of teachers, lot of training, but I don't think that's a very scientific way of going. But that was very scientific way of going about it. I recall we set up a portal called Diksha portal, and I'm told it's a very vibrant portal now. That portal now has all the details of all the teachers, and the training now is on a more scientific pedestal. In my time, I remember I came across teachers who were compulsive trainees, from one training to another. So some teachers were trained so much that they didn't know how to teach, and other teachers were not trained. So this Diksha platform gets endorsed in the national education policy also. If you read the policy, it talks about this portal. And I'm so glad this portal is becoming increasingly vibrant, increasingly useful. And it is not merely in terms of training the teachers, it has many users. And this brings me to the fourth dimension of teachers in this country. One of the biggest problems that we face in this country is the shortage of teachers. I tried to analyze that as Education Secretary, and I came up with very interesting results. In UP, I was informed that the state government is short by 60,000 odd teachers. And when I did a detailed analysis, I found that there was surplus by 80,000. Now, how did this happen? It happened because teachers were recruited for a district. And all of them, when they got recruited, tried to go to a city district, that is Lucknow, Meerut, Agra, all these major cities, Kanpur, So what used to happen was that these teachers used to get transferred to such districts, which were city districts, and you were always short of teachers in smaller districts, which were rural districts. So you have shortage of teachers in rural areas, whereas in the urban areas, they're surplus districts. And what do? They do politicking. We call them Netagiri in UP. You know, teachers have become, pardon my using this phrase, biggest netas in some of these states, in Bihar, in UP. They're only doing politicking. They're hardly teaching. And another dimension in UP and Bihar, which I found in government schools, was that some teachers engaged somebody else to teach on their behalf. I mean, some of you won't believe this. That's a fact of life. They used to get the whole salary. And mind you, government teachers are paid pretty well. If some of you know about it. In private schools, there is a serious problem of salaries to teachers. But in government schools, they're paid very well. So they can afford to pay 10,000 rupees to somebody else who teaches on their behalf. It's a racket. You know, we have reduced education to a joke. In my entire career of 38 years, in all my assignments, including that of the coal secretary, I made myself totally redundant. You know, I made myself totally useless in the sense, created systems that took over, and I thought I had done my job and I could move on. It was only in school education that I felt that I wish I had some more time, because the problems are so deeply entrenched that's very difficult to sort it out at a short notice. And then, as I said, there are entrenched vested interests. So this is about teachers. Fortunately, the national education policy also recognizes the importance and the role of the teacher. The other aspects of education policy, I'll briefly touch upon, because I would rather have some interactive time with you, try and answer some of your questions, at least those that I can see would certainly want me to answer a few questions. So I would touch upon some of the salient features of the school education part of the national education policy. I think one of the most brilliant aspects of this policy is the recognition of the fact that a child needs to be not taught, may not be the right word, may be educated before class 1. So which we call the preschool education, because all researchers world over have established very clearly that the brain formulation happens between 0 and 7 years. After that, there's not much of a scope. And hence, it's important to provide intervention at that age. I'm so glad. And we had actually included this as a part of the Samagra Shiksha scheme that was at my time. We had reformulated the existing scheme of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. And in Samagra Shiksha, we had included preschool. And I'm so glad that the national education policy recognizes that it is essential to train the child even before he or she goes to class 1. So that's a very, very positive development. Similarly, I think another positive development is the recognition for vocational training. You know, earlier, vocational training or vocational education was treated after, science, arts, commerce, and then someone who did, do well in all these three areas, he opted for vocational education because this sort of an education was not recognized at various levels. This recognition had already started coming in CBSE, but I'm so glad that the national education policy also recognizes the importance of vocational education. Similarly, I think another good aspect of national education policy, which focuses on overall development of the child, because I don't think the focus is on teaching so much as focus is on the overall development of the child. So sports, extracurricular activities have been also given a lot of importance in the policy. The other aspect is that the child will now have a lot of options. And the options would be in terms of mixing some of these subjects in the art domain along with the science faculty that you would have. Earlier, if you chose a particular stream, say arts stream, you couldn't pick up any subject from the science stream, and vice versa. If you picked it up from science stream, you couldn't take up anything from the arts. So I think that's a very, very good suggestion in the national education policy. The other aspect is, which I think is very, very crucial, is another very interesting thing that was happening in education with that I discovered. When I took over as school education secretary, I found that many students got 100 out of 100 in English literature and Hindi literature. So I was shocked. I wondered whether Shakespeare must be turning in his grave, because to get 100 out of 100 in English literature was unthinkable. During our time, it was unthinkable. How can you be perfect in English literature? You can be perfect in maths. You can be perfect in physics. But how can you be perfect in humanities? Because there is always a different point of view. There is always more to learn in that domain, which means that you've learned everything 100 out of 100 in literature. So I had the habit of finding the why of a problem. So I tried to find the why. And to my utmost horror, I discovered that number of boards spiked the marks, meaning thereby the child may have got 85 marks, but they added 10% to it. I don't know how many of you are aware. I can see some people smiling, but this is a shocker, absolutely. We are misleading. In my book, I call it a delusion, a farcical delusion. That's the heading of the chapter in my book. How are you deluding a child into believing that he's here where he's actually here? And this delusion, he gets over it when he goes to graduation and suddenly discover that his feet are not on the ground, and it creates huge problems. So what I did was I called all the chairpersons of the boards to Delhi, and I had a very intensive discussion with them. And I told them, is it our job to delude children? They said, sir, everyone is happy. The child is happy. The teacher is happy. The principal is happy. The school is happy. The parents are happy. The state governments are happy. Everyone is happy, and you're causing unhappiness. I said, if reality can cause a bit of unhappiness, it is worth having that unhappiness at this point in time, because reality will dawn on the child at some point in time. So they all somehow, for whatever reason, maybe I was secretary, they were listening to me, they all got convinced. They agreed with me. And number of boards issued these instructions. In fact, in 2 boards, the pass percentage came down, and there was a lot of flack. They thought education has gone bad. I said, no, it's reality. But as it happens in our country, a few, senior officers rang me up. Sir, my daughter is this year in class 12. You do it next year. I said, what nonsense? How can you do that? Many important people rang me up. And suddenly I thought I had become important also, because when important people talk to you, you also get a feeling of importance. But I was aghast. These are responsible citizens of this country. For their own selfish interest, they won't bother about the system. But I stuck to my guns. I said nothing to it. I'm a very unpopular man that way. All the important people very annoyed with me. They would like to do hanky-panky. I won't let them do. I did that for 38 years. I had a great time. Sometimes at some other's cost, but I had a great time. So these guys went to the court. And the judge said, why don't you do it next year? So my argument was very simple. If it is a wrong, it should be stopped this year. Why wait for 1 year? And the judge was very smart. He knew Mr. Anil Swarup will retire after a few months. So next year we'll have the same maza, same enjoyment. And so it was stayed. And I retired. And to my utmost horror and amusement, last year I found that still children getting 100 out of 100 in English literature. Now, why do I say that? Why am I giving you this background? Because when trying to assess the reason for this stupidity or this farcical delusion, I discovered that universities like Delhi University, their admission is determined on the basis of this farcical delusion. So the more marks you get, the easier you get admitted to the university. So this was the primary cause, apart from the farcical elation amongst the children. So the national education policy handles this. How? They are talking in terms of a entrance examination for university, meaning thereby that one of the principal rationale for spiking marks will be taken away once that happens. I can go on and on national education policy. As I said, it's a very fascinating document, but I won't speak much. I'll touch upon the practical aspect. What is not so right with the policy? There's a lot of right with the policy. Purely on a matter of principles and then on matter of practice. On matter of principles, my reservation about the policy is that it does not consider the participation or the contribution of the private sector in school education to the extent that it should have. It still treats private education system as something which is not good. And hence, it does not encourage private sector. And the tragedy is almost 50% of children are going to private schools. So how can you ignore them? My personal view, and there could be a difference opinion here, I think this whole business of not-for-profit should be thrown out of the window. I know for sure now, I'm convinced that most of these schools in the private sector are doing education for making money, period. And I know how they are making it. Now let's recognize that as a fact. Why are we ducking it under the carpet, under the hypocrisy that private schools should not be allowed to make money? They should be allowed to make money. Let them make money openly and tax it. Why are we continuing with this facade of creating not-for-profit? They create a society, the society provides service to the schools, and all the money gets taken by the society, which is not an educational institution. It's a racket run by a large number of, one of the mafias that I call. And when I say mafias, please don't mistake me. Mafias are only a handful of people that bring a bad name to the entire system. Mafia is not a large number of people, but they are very influential people who won't let things change because that's how they run the show. And that's true of private schools also. I know a large number of private schools are doing phenomenally wonderful job and they're not making money, but there are a handful of them. And some of them are run by my colleagues, ex-former colleagues, who know the, how ropes all around, who know who's important, who's not so important, and they're doing it. So it's a collusion of all these people who are running the show. And unfortunately, the national education policy does not discuss at length the contribution of the private sector in school education. To me, they are making a phenomenal contribution, needs to be recognized, should have been recognized, and their problems addressed. In fact, we should encourage private sector participation rather than discourage them. The policy doesn't do that. The second reservation at the policy level is with regard to the role of non-governmental organizations, the civil society organizations. As I said, I traveled to 24 states intensively, and I discovered that a large number of NGOs are doing phenomenal work. In fact, witnessing the marvelous work being done by the national government organization, post-retirement, I've started this movement called Nexus of Good. And let me digress a bit to delve upon this, because I'd request all of you to have a look at the web portal and join the Nexus of Good. What is this Nexus of Good? There's a lot of negativity in this society, This is wrong, that is wrong. I also say that a few things are genuinely wrong. We should say that. But there's a lot of good also that is happening around in the society. Because of our fondness for masala, we don't even notice that good. We don't even recognize that good. We don't even appreciate that good. I thought if all the rascals and ruffians of the world could come together and make life difficult for us, how about good people coming together and make life happier for people around us? That's what Nexus is Good all about. Nexus is Good is good can be done because it is being done. It's a question of having a look at that good work, understanding that good work, and then try to replicate and scale that good work. That's what Nexus is Good is all about. Since this talk is not about Nexus is Good, I'm not going to the details of it, but I thought I should touch upon it because there's a lot of good work happening. Now, NGOs are at the heart of this good work. I'm not saying all NGOs are good. Like, they're also part of the society. There are as many good, bad people there as well. But they are outstanding NGOs. We can learn from them. The national education policy is virtually silent. It mentions, for example, out-of-school children. Policy talks about out-of-school children. Now, do you think that a government officer will go and get these out-of-school children back to school? I mean, we must understand that NGOs have a role to play. My approach was very different throughout 38 years. My approach was, there are good people in the public sector, there are good people in the private sector. Instead of cursing each other, which we normally do, the people in the government will curse people in the private. They will say that they're only making money. People in the private will say everyone in the government is corrupt. Both are equally wrong. There are good people on either side of the fence. How about a public-private partnership between these two people, these two sets of good people? Now, national education policy does not talk about NGOs at all. This was basically at the policy level. Now, let me look at the operational level and I'll conclude. Because as I said, I like to spend more time interacting with you than giving you a monologue. And for me also, since I'm just recovering from a long illness, so it becomes difficult for me to continuously speak. On a practical plane, I know the ideas are very good. In India, almost everyone has an idea for a problem. You go to the market and how school education can be improved, everyone will have an idea that this will have to do. But for an idea to fructify and sustain in a country like ours, which is fortunately still a democracy, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and emotionally relatable. Now, I will not go into the details of it because that will require an hour for me to explain. But let me touch upon one aspect of these 7 dimensions. Where is the money to implement this education policy? The education policy says 6% of the GDP should be allocated to education. Now, this is nothing new. This was said by long ago Dr. Kothari, long ago. But the maximum contribution has been 3.1%. And ironically, when I was education secretary, again, to my utmost horror, I discovered that from 2014 onwards, the actual real allocation to school education had actually been coming down year on year. And we are talking of 6%. So, हमारी तरफ यूपी में कहते हैं जेब में नहीं पत्ता चल दिए कलकत्ता. Unless you have money, you may have great ideas. You may talk a bit. We are great talkers. But who's going to walk? For walk, you require, that wherewithal, that financial wherewithal we don't have that. As I said, topic of education is very dear to me. Now that I don't have to walk, I can talk a lot. I can go on and on, but I'll stop here because let's have some interactive session. I would love to have your observations, your questions, so that we can take it forward. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you very much, Swaroop sir. I am neither teacher nor student today. I am a non-fiction editor. I have great respect for what you said. I absolutely believe that early childhood education is the most important to begin the roots for our students to be more effective. I also endorse completely the private and joint idea because it works. It works because the private has a certain amount of business acumen and the public has a certain amount of social commitment. Business acumen plus social commitment will make a better education system, as you have told us today. Thank you so much, sir, and God bless you.
Before you conclude, may I request you, since you are into non-fiction area, I would request you to read the 2 books that I have written. Probably you will be able to relate to it much more, not just the civil servant.
Certainly, I will read your books. I'm at the moment reading your colleague Tino Desa's book that we are going to discuss on the 14th in Bhopal. I definitely will read your books. That is all I do. I have no other expenditure in my life except living expenses and books. So thank you, sir.
Earning.
I beg your pardon?
Expenditure on books is an earning.
It absolutely is an investment.
Expenditure on books is an earning.
Yes,
it's an investment.
Yes. My daughter, who is teaching in New Zealand today, early childhood education, after teaching postgraduate students in Delhi University, has left her books with me, and she's asking me to send them. And I'm not sending them.
Wonderful.
I'm keeping them.
Wonderful.
I will read your books.
I appreciate it. Yes, any other question, observation?
Sir, I have a small curiosity to know, since you have been into administrative service for a longer time. In academy, we always feel, as a teacher, we always have this tension between the administrative mindsets versus academic mindsets. Okay, like you give a wonderful example of having 100 marks in literature. Okay, and when educational institutes, they want their student to clear their boards. They want their students to have a big number of students passing from their schools and other things. So how do we deal with this kind of situation at ground level?
Which situation are you talking of?
But
What is this
when
message?
when there's an administrative pressure, like let me put it in example, like some school is asking teachers to give more marks so that there's the result of the school in the board or in the competitive exams goes high, means the students get eligibility and kind of things. And always teacher always face this dilemma, because ethically it gives a pinch, and but since it's an order from the authorities, we cannot also deny this kind of situations.
Okay, Mr. Parekh, as an administrator, we face much more dilemmas than you face in mere marks. If you care to read my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, you will come across
Definitely, sir. I'll read that. I
now,
have already ordered on Amazon.
how do you handle it? How did I handle them? There is an American monk by the name of Reinhold Niebuhr, and he made a very seminal remark. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things that I can, and the wisdom to understand the difference between the two. You must understand that very clearly. It is not to say that you shouldn't be doing what you think is unethical, but you must understand your boundaries. I tell this to my fellow colleagues in the administration also. Now, if you start acting ethically within your boundaries, you will discover, and I see that you are a young man, you will discover that those boundaries start expanding. Let me give you an example. You know, my fellow colleagues often complain that the politicians don't allow them to do work. I asked them a counter question. I asked them, did any politician ask you to come late to the office ever? No. I said, do you come to the office on time? Second, did any of politician ask you to misbehave with people who come to meet you? No. Then why do you misbehave with people who come to meet you? Because they come for some work. You have to be polite to them, and so on and so forth. So if you define your boundaries where such orders are not coming to you, gradually you will evolve as an individual to be reckoned with. You know, my book ends with this couplet. खुदी कुकर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. Why? The reason is very simple. You know, you will see that there are some individuals within your organizations who are to be reckoned with. No one messes up with them. They are also in the same situation. They are also getting the same orders from the top, but they are able to get away with that domain which they have created for themselves. So my friend, I cannot advise you to disobey those orders, which will be foolish. But I would advise you, and I got away with that, I remember one day the principal secretary to Prime Minister told me, आपके मंत्री आपसे बहुत डरते हैं. So sir, should I take it as a compliment? Now, in my 38 years of career, I never asked for any favor from any politician. That was my strength. That was my strength. So you become strong on your own. You know, I don't want to give gyan to people here because there's so many Gyani Purushes in this country who will tell others what to do. I would suggest you read the book and you'll find whatever I'm telling you, I practiced it. It's not that I succeeded always. You will find a number of examples where I failed totally. But so is the case with anybody. Give me an example of an individual who always succeeded. He didn't. But I led a very satisfied professional life. That is what that matters. I gave you an example where a senior IAS officer had to resign because I couldn't protect him. It happens. You know, you'll not have only successes. It's a question of how you evolve as an individual.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I'll take this advice, and I have ordered the book from Amazon. Thank you.
Do one thing that we can have
Any other question? Observation?
Any other question from the audience sitting here? Yes, sir, you have a question. Sir, actually, we are a room full of people led by our father principal, sister vice principal, and a number of students, academics, and research scholars sitting here. So you may not be
if they have, they can put their question on the chat box, and then you can read it out to me if they have any questions.
Sir has a question, so I'm just sharing the mic to him. Sir will ask the question.
सर आई एम एन के कौशिक, मेरी आवाज आ रही है आपको?
थोड़ा सा जोर के बोलेंगे कौशिक साहब?
सर हाँ, आई एम एन के कौशिक, आई वर्क इन नवोदय विद्यालय, केंद्रीय विद्यालय बोथ।
जी,
ये सर आपने कई माफिया का नाम लिया है, उसमें एक माफिया और है जिसका आप नाम छोड़ गए, वो है एक कोचिंग करने वाला, कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट वाला माफिया। ये भी देश में बहुत बड़ा माफिया है जो हमारे नेचुरल टैलेंट को मार रहा है। जिस बच्चे के पास पैसा नहीं है वो बच्चा कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट नहीं जा सकता, उसका सिलेक्शन नहीं होगा। जिस माँ बाप का पैसा है वो कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट क्या है चला जाएगा। एक तो मेरा
मैं आपसे पूर्णतः कौशिक जी, मैं आपसे पूर्णतः सहमत हूं। मैंने बहुत लंबी फेहरिस्त है माफियाओं की, तो समय अभाव के कारण मैंने सिर्फ उनको और संकेत किया जिनको मैं आज चर्चा कर सकता था, जिनके बारे में। माफिया जो आप बात कह रहे हैं इसका भी समाधान है। अच्छी बात यह है कि समस्याओं का समाधान उपलब्ध है। ये ऐसी समस्याएं नहीं है जो इतनी दुरूह नहीं है कि आप इनका समाधान नहीं कर सकते, निश्चित रूप से समाधान कर सकते हैं। मैंने एक आरंभ किया था प्रक्रिया जब मैं सचिव था, जो आपने माफिया बनाए कोचिंग के। मैंने IIT दिल्ली के प्रोफेसर से चर्चा की। मैंने उनसे कहा कि आप क्या परीक्षा सैट और कैट के हिसाब से नहीं कर सकते जहां बिना कोचिंग के आदमी करता है? ये यहाँ की परीक्षा ऐसी क्यों होती है कि जहां कोचिंग की आवश्यकता होती है? आप परीक्षा का तरीका ही बदलिए जिससे कोचिंग कम हो सके, समाप्त तो शायद नहीं होगी। तो वो सहमत थे कि ऐसा प्रक्रिया बन सकती है। और अगर आप ये नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी देखें तो इसमें संकेत हैं इस तरफ कि कोचिंग को कैसे समाप्त किया जाए। मुझे आशा है कि इस पे चर्चा होगी आगे और इस पे कार्य होगा। जितने माफिया हैं, मैं कन्विंस्ड हूं पूर्णतया कि इन माफियाओं का समापन किया जा सकता है। सिर्फ कठिनाई क्या है, ये माफिया इतने पावरफुल हैं जो कि एक वरिष्ठ IAS अधिकारी को उन्होंने मजबूर किया। एक दूसरे IAS अधिकारी, मुझे याद है, वो भी मेरी किताब पे एक चैप्टर है इसमें चेयरमैन CBSE के पीछे पड़े थे। वो चाहते थे उनको भी हटाया जाए। खैर उसमें मैं अड़ गया और वो हटी नहीं। और आप, मुझे प्रशंसा है कि वो अधिकारी आज के तारीख में सचिव हैं, चीफ सेक्रेटरी स्कूल एजुकेशन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया। अगर वो हट जाती तो नहीं कहा जाती।
एक प्रश्न और है सर मेरा, एक क्वेश्चन और है
जी।
आपने कहा कि बहुत अच्छी चीज है कि वोकेशनल एजुकेशन को बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट दिया गया है इसमें। वोकेशनल एजुकेशन, ये सीखो कमाओ योजना पहले भी हुआ करती थी, वोकेशनल एजुकेशन बहुत पहले से था। परंतु बच्चा क्या करेगा ये उसके एटीट्यूड पे निर्भर नहीं, वो पेरेंट्स का माइंड सेट है। मेरा बेटा क्या बनेगा, मेरा बेटा IAS बनेगा, IPS बनेगा या डॉक्टर बनेगा, इंजीनियर बनेगा। तो बच्चे का जो नेचुरल टैलेंट है उसका कोई उपयोग नहीं है। वो ऐसा वही ऑप्शन एडॉप्ट करे जो फादर मदर उसको इम्पोज करें। रिश्तेदार कहेंगे अब उनका बेटा डॉक्टर बन गया, तू तालिक मास्टर क्या बन रहा है, तू कारपेंटर क्यों बनेगा, तू मोची क्यों बनेगा, तू धोबी क्यों बनेगा। तो वो ये स्थिति है। तो वोकेशनल, इसलिए वोकेशनल फेल हो रहा है, वोकेशनल एजुकेशन।
देखिए मैं आपसे सहमत हूं कि ये हम सब, खाली बच्चा क्या, हमारा आप भी सामाजिक दबाव के रहते हुए अपना कार्य करते हैं, तो बच्चा ही है, वो भी दबाव में है। लेकिन क्या हम एक अपॉर्चुनिटी क्रिएट कर सकते हैं जिससे यदि कोई चाहे तो वहां जा सके? ये है समस्या। अगर अपॉर्चुनिटी ही नहीं होगी तो अगर कोई चाहेगा तो भी नहीं जा सकता। तो इस नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में मेरे जो समझ में आया, ये एक अपॉर्चुनिटी क्रिएट कर रहे हैं जो कि सामान्य उसी प्रकार से होगी जैसे कि आर्ट्स, कॉमर्स और साइंस के लिए होगी। वर्तमान व्यवस्था में सब स्कूलों में वो अपॉर्चुनिटी उपलब्ध नहीं है। और दूसरा क्या था कि हम इस सामाजिक व्यवस्था को भी आंशिक रूप से परिवर्तित करने का प्रयास कर रहे हैं जिससे हम इनको समान धरातल पर ला रहे हैं। अगर समान धरातल पर नहीं लाए और वोकेशनल ट्रेनिंग को हम नीचे रखेंगे तो कोई वहां नहीं जाएगा। ये परिवर्तन एक दिन या एक साल में नहीं आएगा। आप एक तरफ अपॉर्चुनिटी क्रिएट करेंगे, दूसरी तरफ उसकी इंपॉर्टेंस क्रिएट करेंगे, कुछ समय बाद लोगों को एक चिंतन आने लगेगा। क्योंकि आप विकसित देशों में देखें, वहां पे ये अपॉर्चुनिटी, जर्मनी में देखें, ये अपॉर्चुनिटी है वहां पर कि हर आदमी जबरदस्ती आर्ट्स या साइंस या कॉमर्स ना पढ़े। तो क्या आज की तारीख में यहाँ स्कूलों में सब में, अगर मैं किसी स्कूल में चले जाऊं, मुझे वोकेशनल एजुकेशन लेनी है, वो कहेंगे हमारे पास ना टीचर है, ना पढ़ाने को है, ना लेबोरेटरी है, तो अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं है। क्या हम वो अपॉर्चुनिटी क्रिएट कर सकते हैं? ये इशू है। अब इसमें लंबी चर्चा हो जाएगी कि अगर नहीं होगा तो क्या होगा और होगा तो कैसे होगा, इस पे भी चर्चा हो सकती है।
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू।
I can see Nidhi posted a question in the chat box. Nidhi, if you're there and if you want to take this question up, please do. So meanwhile, I would like to ask you a question, sir. You talk about in the NEP talks about multidisciplinary aspects, but coming up with a timetable which fits in for a multidisciplinary, courses. How is that a challenge in higher education institute and also in schools? Like if a child is taking music, mathematics, and say one more subject. So how do the recruitment happen and how does the timetable framing happen? Don't you think it's a challenge?
देखिए, ये whatever has been suggested by NEP is based on what is happening internationally. In other countries, it is happening. But as I said in the beginning, one is to say something, the other is to implement it. Unfortunately, entire committee of that was constituted, there was not a single teacher or a principal as a part of that committee. I wish there were, because there were no practitioners who could come up with practical problems of implementing a policy decision. My view was very simple. When Dr. Kasturi Rangan came to meet me, the chairman of the National Education Policy Committee, when he came to meet me, I told him why you are wasting your time. So he was a bit surprised. He said, you all have constituted us. I said, you are wasting your time because you will come up with a policy without an action plan. It is when you work out an action plan, the one thing that you mentioned, there are many other things, that you discover the problems in implementing a policy formulation. It's easy to say that you should allow mother tongue. One of the provisions is mother tongue from class 1 to 5. Now, where are you going to and how are you going to get those teachers to teach in mother tongue? And what will be the cost involved in it in engaging that teacher? What will you do to the existing teachers who don't teach in mother tongue? There is a host of issues. Now, the education policy formulators, it is not their concern. They say, ye karna hai. If they had a practitioner on the board and if they had worked out the details of the action plan, they would have addressed this issue. Now, I'm not an expert at formulation of curriculum or how the system works in a school. I've never had that experience. But I'm sure there would be people who would be able to guide as to what sort of a curriculum should be used, I'm sure there would be people who can do it. I'm not an expert, so maybe I'm not the right person to answer the question.
We'll have the last question by ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Meena Koshi. I would like to ask. Yes, am I audible to you, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Sir, you told that government teachers misuse their salaries. They get huge amount of salaries and they misuse their salaries.
I see. Please don't misquote. Some teachers do it. Some, not government teachers. Generally, I'll be killed tomorrow. Tomorrow there will be dharna outside.
No. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. Some misuse.
Some misuse. Yes.
I am a private school teacher, and every time we teachers talk and we say that when the government will aid us, because we are ready to impart our knowledge, we are ready to do hard work, we are hardworking, and we always think when the government will aid us, so that we also would be able to, that we are not neglected, as you told earlier, and definitely the coaching mafia, that also should be restricted, because children go to coaching centers and they come and they tell that we have already learned, and that creates a lot of problem among the children who are not financially good enough to join the coaching centers. So it would be very good that if the coaching mafia is controlled.
I am not very sure whether government will ever be able to aid any additional private schools. Some of them are already being aided, but I don't think they will be able to add to it, because I don't think there is money available. The existing number of teachers government is finding it difficult to pay the salaries. So to add on to that, whether it is desirable, whether it is likable, it won't happen. Many things may be desirable, but you have to look at the practicality of it. So you have to live with what it is. And I think the viability of the schools, viability of the education has to be taken care institutionally in each school. So I don't think that's going to happen. Many people may say that hum dekhenge aur dekhna hai aur karenge. I don't think it will happen because government will never have that amount of money to aid the private schools additionally beyond what they're already doing. As far as mafias and coaching are concerned, I think everyone agrees, but it's like this 100 out of 100 marks in English education, where everyone seems to be happy with it also. So I don't know someone who's going to bell the cat. It's going to be tough, but it can be done.
Thank you, sir.
So you'd be happy to know that we belong to a state of Madhya Pradesh. We belong from Madhya Pradesh, where NEP is going to be implemented from this session only. And this talk of yours will definitely help us to take the right course. Any suggestions at the forefront you would like us to remember as a higher education institute, that how should we take this journey forward, with NEP 2020, because the government has already decided and it's not going to roll back, and definitely NEP is already rolled out in this current academic session. So any suggestion, a guru mantra kind of thing which we should keep in mind?
I'm not conversant with what exactly out of NEP is being rolled out in MP. I would believe that the entire NEP cannot be ruled out at this point in time. Nor did NEP itself say that entire thing should be ruled out. So one will have to look at closely the components that are being rolled out by MP before making an observation. I'm not conversant with that. I don't know whether you all are Bhopal based or where you are based. If you are Bhopal based, then probably I can have a physical interaction at some point in time. I do travel to Bhopal once in a while. But without knowing clearly as to what all is being rolled out, it may not be appropriate of me to comment on what and how it could be done. I'm engaged with some of these states. Some of the states had approached me to discuss, but not Madhya Pradesh. So without that input, it would be very difficult for me to respond. But as far as you are concerned as a higher education institution, I think there are huge challenges that NEP brings forth. You have to change your attitude, approach, infrastructure. National education policy is very ambitious. So you'll have to look at practicality of what is being said there and work out a detailed roadmap on what needs to be done, how it will be done, who will do it, by when it will be done. In government, we say we are doing this. I don't know what exactly does it mean when you say, until you go into the details of what, how, and when.
Thank you so much, sir, for that response and for the wonderful session. And from the lovely audience, I would like to hear a big round of applause for sir and the valuable for your time. Definitely, as you said that you make a visit to Bhopal, we would like to have a physical presence of yours in our college. This is just at the heart of Bhopal, and this year we are beginning our Jubilee celebration. We are 50 years into the field of education, and you would be definitely happy. As you are happy virtually, you will definitely be many folds happy when you come here. And the deliberations and the interaction and the conversation will be definitely brainstorming us, and we will move ahead leaps and bounds after this conversation. Thank you so much, sir, for your
God bless all of you. God bless.
On behalf of the staff, the management, the principal, the vice principal, and the entire Department of Education, the student and staff, I extend a warm thanks to you, sir. Thank you for your time. For our invited guests, Dr. Hemant Khandai and Dr. I'm forgetting the name, Dr. N.K. Kaushik, we have a small memento. I request our principal to jointly present to the Department of Continuing Education as a token of our love.
his blessing for conducting our glitch-free inaugurated session of the Faculty Department program. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor R.J. Rao, Vice Chancellor of Barkatullah University, Professor K.N. Tripathi, Director, HRDC, Professor Hemant Khandai, HOD of Department of Continuing Education, Barkatullah University, and Anil Swaroop Sir, former Co-Secretary of India, IAS, for their delightful presence and initiation collaboration of Faculty Development Program. I would also like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to our Principal, Dr. Father John P.J., Dr. Sister Sonia Kurian, Vice Principal, for their encouraging support. I would also like to thank all the department teachers for their resilient support. Last but not the least, to all the participants, both online and offline, for their patient listening. Thank you, everybody.